Hey guys, Josh from the Ancient History Guy here. Hello and welcome to all. I hope you are having a fantastic day. Today we are going to be talking about the ancient Celts, specifically the age-old debate as to whether or not the Celts were actually good metal workers. So without further ado, let's get into it. So to give you guys some context, the Romans were not exactly the Celts' biggest fans. This was largely due to the fact that before Rome took over the Italian peninsula, it was actually sacked by a marauding army of Celtic Gauls, looking for loot and plunder. This understandably did not go down well with the Romans, who began to hate all things Gallic. Indeed, within a matter of days, Rome had reorganised and utterly destroyed the invading Gauls. This revenge did not stop at the destruction of the army that sacked Rome. One of the first regions the Romans attempted to bring under their control was the Gallic territories of northern Italy, securing the borders and keeping the Gauls and the Celts out. They quickly went on a propaganda smear campaign, noticeably describing how monstrous the Celtic religion was, especially seeing it focus so much on severed heads. This didn't just stop at the religion, but continued on actually smearing the Celts themselves, noticeably portraying them as an uncivilized people, whose ironworking skills were something to laugh at. Indeed, it was made public knowledge that the Celts often had to stop mid-battle to straighten out their rubbish iron swords, which easily bent out of shape. In reality, the Celts actually seem to have discovered iron working on their own, separately to the many iron-wielding nations of the classical world. We don't know exactly how and when they discovered it, but it's very likely they developed the techniques via trial and error, working with other metals, most noticeably bronze. Within no time at all, the Celts were mass-producing iron weapons, to the point where they were gaining a bit of a reputation for it. Indeed, metalworking was so important to the Celts that it was almost seen as a sort of religious experience. You see, ironworking actually requires a fair amount of knowledge, and so smiths were seen as largely being in the same intellectual class as the Celts' religious priests, the Druids. In fact, iron was quite dominant all over the Celtic world, none more so than in Britain. Turns out the Britons actually had iron occurring naturally all over the surface of the island, most noticeably in wet, peaty bogs. In fact, it seems that ironworking was a fairly common occurrence in the island, with even some evidence suggesting that it was done within the homestead, although it's largely believed that the actual smelting of the iron from the ore took place a little while away from the settlement, due to the temperatures needed to separate it from its base form, and funnily enough, fire is hot and has a tendency to set wooden buildings alight. It seems though that there was no dedicated specialised iron working sites. This is in stark contrast to the bronze working sites, where there seems to have been an abundance of furnaces. In fact, bronze seems to have been the dominant metal throughout most of the Celtic Age. Iron was obviously preferred for weapons and armour, but when it came to jewellery, bridles and other metal objects, bronze seemed to have been used. This was probably because bronze is a little easier to mould into shape. In fact, one of the most noticeable trade to come out of the bronze furnaces of Britain were bronze mirrors. These mirrors were often decorated with complex patterns. One of the most noticeable examples of this is the Desborough mirror, dating to around the 1st century BC. So we can safely say that this Roman rumour about the Celts being terrible metal workers was and is complete and utter nonsense. Indeed, why would the Romans make fun of the Celtic weapons and armour when they themselves were actually using those very same weapons because they were better than their own? The truth is that the Romans actually traded regularly with the Celts, noticeably those in the Alps whose metalworking was almost next to none. Indeed, the supply of iron weapons from this region was of such high quality that Rome actually took the region under its protective wing, noticeably responding to a Germanic threat in the area. In fact, not only did the Romans regularly trade with the Celts, but they actually borrowed many of their military innovations. This was not just limited to Rome, with even the Greeks attempting to copy the invading Gauls by mimicking their lighter, more mobile spear infantry in the form of the four-axe spears. Indeed, chainmail, helmets, and even weapons of Celtic design made their way to the armies of the Hellenic world. Eventually, even Roman armies would be decked out in weapons and armour made in Celtic designs, with Celtic iron making techniques. So what can we conclude from this? Well, we can come to the conclusion that the Celts were actually master metalworkers, able to create fine, decorative metal objects out of both bronze and iron. They seem to have specialised in bronze, whilst ironworking seems to have been more localised in order to produce personal weapons. Indeed, most of the reputation of the Celts being terrible metalworkers seems to be the result of Roman propaganda, making the Celts seem less civilized than themselves, and therefore by default the inferior people. This of course wasn't true, as the Romans regularly used Celtic weapons and armour in their armies. What do I think of this? Well, I think it's a fascinating subject in Celtic history. The Celts seem to be pretty much defined by several aspects of their culture, most noticeable their religion and their attitude towards warfare. I find it interesting how smiths were held in the same category as their religious leaders, as they were the more educated members of Celtic society. But those are just my thoughts. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below.
Thank you for watching and listening to our videos. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe if you've enjoyed. All sources are listed and linked in the description below. I've been the Ancient History Guy, and as always, I'll be seeing you later.